New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring. Please help us say thank you to all of our organizational sponsors, including the Hefferland Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Center for Spiritual Living United Life, Sunshine Cathedral, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Universal Joy Center, Unity Kitchener, Unity Spiritual Center Ottawa, Home Center for Spiritual Living, Satya Center, Begin Within Ministries, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and the Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. On behalf of New Thought Media Network, thank you, and please like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, come be you.
Welcome to the Inclusive Church. My name is Tracy Brown. I'm your host every Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, and we come together and dive in to our commitments to create spiritual communities where oneness does not require sameness. And even though we don't require it, it's so easy for many of us to just relax into creating environments where everybody is more alike than dislike, or unalike, or different from one another, and to make an environment where people feel like they have to give up their uniqueness, instead of communities where we thrive on all the different experiences and cultures that people bring. And that's what we talk about every week. And this is the very last day of Women's History Month. And as we are saying goodbye to Women's History Month, it's like, oh, April, May, June. We are just really 8 or 9 weeks away from plans for Pride Month in most locations. In most locations in North America, Pride Month is celebrated or honored in the month of June. I do know that's not the case for everybody. And so if you are in a community that recognizes Pride Month or has a focus on the LGBTQ plus communities in October or in any other month, then you just have more time to implement some of the ideas that I'm going to be sharing over the next few weeks. This is going to be a multi-week series, and today I'm going to really focus in on some key things to remember related to the language we use, the policies that we have set up, and representation as we already know it to be in our communities. And so I'm really glad that you joined me. Thanks, Anita, for saying good afternoon. And I'm happy to know that you are watching today live. If you have a comment or question as we are going through this next 35 minutes, then please feel free to use the chat or the comment section, depending on which platform you are engaged with. And I will see your comment or your question and do my best to integrate it into the conversation today. So, why? The shortest version of why are we focusing on this over the next few weeks is because, well, the shortest version is because throughout the year, many of the communities that are committed to being inclusive do follow the cultural celebration months. And it's funny because I am using the language that is most often used, cultural celebration. But in reality, it is an opportunity for us to honor different cultures, educate ourselves and others about different cultural norms and needs. And it is an opportunity for us to really explore how do we live our universal spiritual principles and what are some of the ways that we might learn from different communities in terms of integration of our spiritual principles and values in the world. So it's not for me about just about celebrating, like having a party or, going to a parade for St. Patrick's Day or drinking, tequila on Cinco de Mayo or beer or whatever. It's not just the culture. In the context of our churches, it really needs to be what are we learning about so that we can fully engage people from different groups in our church. And also what can we learn from different groups about the ways that our spiritual values and principles have been integrated. So lots of examples about that, but I'm going to do my best to stay focused for the next few minutes on preparing for June. So what can we do in April and May to prepare ourselves individually as leaders and to prepare our spiritual community and the people who are participants, guests, or members in our churches to get the most out of the month of June. So my kind of subtitle in my head is how do we move from invitation to inclusion? How do we move from inviting people who identify as LGBTQ plus? How do we go from saying, oh, everyone is welcome here, to actually creating an environment where everyone feels included, respected, valued, included? And as it relates to Pride Month, a lot of that is moving beyond all are welcome here. Beyond all are welcome here, beyond the catchphrase, which I ranted about recently, the catchphrase of we're a safe community for you if you are LGBTQ. There is usually a gap. Sometimes it's a small gap, but often it's a very large gap between our stated commitment to inclusion and the real life experience that people have when they come to participate in our services, our classes, our events, and our activities. So I already said it, but repeating, this is just the first in a series of shows focused on preparing for Pride Month and beyond. Because Pride Month, you may have activities, but I want to give you some, something that you can also take beyond the month of June into how you operate throughout the year. So let's start with language. I have at least 4 times, maybe 5, I have said LGBTQ plus. So that works for me because I know what it means, but I'm really aware that everybody doesn't necessarily know what the different letters mean when we put them all together. So if in your community it is pretty standard to use the acronym LGBTQ plus, you still need to do what I'm about to do, which is say the words that go with acronym. Not necessarily every time, but very early in your efforts or in your promotional materials, you want to actually say lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. Now, if in your community, it is more common to use LGBTQIA, then use that. And again, actually say the words that form the acronym. You want to be really careful about using any acronym really all throughout the year without explaining it like near the beginning of every program or in the promotional materials related, because it's dangerous to assume that people already know what you are talking about. And related to language, I also want to remind you there are times to be specific. So the acronym LGBTQ plus covers a lot of groups, and the plus, right, refers to additional groups that may have that do use a different word related to sexual orientation or gender identity. And so the plus incorporates that. But what if you actually have planned a conversation, a dialogue for one specific group or one or two of the groups that are included in the acronym? Then what you really want to be sure to do is identify specifically those groups. Hey, Lenora, so glad that you jumped in today from North Carolina. And yes, often, especially in spiritual communities, Anita has reminded us the category of two-spirit is also often used, and sometimes used instead of the T for trans and some transgender, and sometimes as simply an additional label in the group of labels. So it is important for you to know what is common practice in your own community. But if you, It's important for you to know in your own community. And keep in mind, if you have a large virtual community, then you need to keep that in mind in how you use language. And I'll give you a reference for that before this time is up. But if you are, let's say you've decided during Pride Month, because of questions that congregants have been asking or comments that have been made in the last year, let's say you've decided that you're going to host a dialogue or a conversation specifically about the experience of transgender folks and what they are experiencing and how that how you want to help people be more comfortable with this conversation and frame it, of course, in the context of spiritual principle. Well, if that is the focus of the event, then it would not be appropriate for you to promote this event as an LGBTQ plus or an LGBTQIA event unless you then add something specific. For this event, we are going to specifically focus on X, Y, or Z. Often a big mistake that is made is that, okay, well, I've got the acronym now, so I'm just going to use it. But then you're creating a false expectation for people who come to the event, thinking you're going to be talking about all or most of the groups that are included in the acronym, and they may or may not have an interest in one specific group for whatever reason. So do not host a forum on acceptance and integration of group A, but promote it as a forum for all groups. This happens not just during Pride Month, it happens during Black History Month, when people will say, oh, we're doing something for people of color, but they're really focused on one audience within or one group, one demographic group within the umbrella of people of color, which might be Black folks. And so, or the same thing happens in September, when it's Hispanic Heritage Month, and they'll be like, oh, we really invite and love to have people of color. And so, but they're really talking about people of Latin descent. So I'm not going to get on my soapbox about that, but just a reminder, be specific in your language if your focus for your programming is very specific. Number 3 thing to think about as it relates to language is get your pronouns right. We could have a whole long conversation about whether you are comfortable with the pronouns, different usage of pronouns. We can have a long conversation about whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not. What I'm saying is that if you are committing to be inclusive, then you need to be able to not only understand, but also model and educate related to pronoun usage. One of the things that often surprises me is even when people get past their discomfort with they and them, or they are uncomfortable about some of the many other possibilities for pronoun use that you don't hear as much. We keep having to go back to, I will respect what some individual or some group says, this is what I want to be called, or this is the language that I use, and this is what works for me. And they're talking about themselves. If I'm going to respect them, I'm going to respect how they identify themselves, not how I would like to identify them. And so if you're not comfortable having that conversation with people, if you're not skilled yet at being able to explain it, then before we get to Pride Month, then get some coaching, get some mentoring, go to some of the resources, and make sure you understand it enough, because it just makes me cringe. This was about 3 years ago, because pre-COVID, after COVID, right? It was after COVID, and it was one of the pretty early meetings where there were a lot of people coming back together. So I would say it was 2023, late 2023 or early 2024. And I was at an event that had a couple hundred people, and there was someone who was presenting, and this is not a quote, but basically they said, "Oh, well, I don't know all about this, these pronoun things. It's not the way I was taught." But their topic was about inclusion. Their topic was about bringing more people in and learning to be together. And they just totally dismissed it, well, I'm not going to do that because it doesn't fit with how I see the world or how I want to be called. And I couldn't be so bothered as to even try to understand so that I could explain it to you. This would not be the model that would be preferable for someone who identifies themselves as a leader in a spiritual community. So it is important that you understand and that you're able to share, or at least that you have resources that you can suggest to people who may have questions. So as it relates to language in general for the LGBTQ plus communities, and or specifically understanding pronouns, the three that I send people to the most are to go to GLAAD, which is GLAAD, or PFLAG, PFLAG, or HRC, or just go to the internet and put in glossary LGBTQ plus, or definitions for Pride Month. If you do a search on anything close to that, you're going to get these and many other definitions and resources for the language that you can use. The American Psychology Association has a glossary directory about language related to sexual orientation and gender identity. There are also resources that are specifically designed for journalists or people who are creating publications. So there's no shortage of resources. Just be willing to take 15 to 20 minutes and look at a couple of them so that you are confident in the language you are using. So in the time we have today, I think that's all I will say about language, because I also want to talk just a little bit about both policy and representation. As it relates to policy, in prepping for Pride Month, it is a really good time to look at your policies and practices as a church. So if you are already committed in a public way to being inclusive, then what policies do you have in place to ensure that people from different groups are welcomed, are greeted, are included in programming. And it may or may not, you may or may not have a policy specifically related to the LGBTQ plus communities, but you at least want to review the policies that you do have. And it may be that you decide to add something that is specific to this community, but it just depends on your environment and your community. There are a number of New Thought communities that a few years ago signed on to an agenda and promotion templates and sequence. And even before that, maybe 10 years before that, there was a real concerted movement for churches to identify themselves as open and affirming. And so you may have that in your policies or in your history. And if you are going to create a policy that is in alignment with some national or international group, then you want to make sure that people really know that, especially the people who are delivering programs for you, people who are on the platform, people who are greeting others. They need to know that, and they need to know what it means in your community. Do not leave it to each individual's imagination to describe what they think it means. And if you did that 10 years ago, but you haven't been talking about it a lot, my guess is you have a lot of newer people in your congregation who may hear the words, but they may not know what the words mean in your local community. And then with representation, the three places you want to make sure you have representation of the LGBTQ plus community is in your current leadership. And that would be board, staff, community partners, maybe a lot of people who are not visible, right? They may be behind the scenes. And David Alexander, thanks for this comment about open and affirming is not just a tagline. Open is not the same as affirming. And if you are using it just as a tagline, oh, we're open and affirming, so, let's pat ourselves on the back. But it's not tied or linked into your policies. It's not tied or linked into or a driving factor for your greeters or hospitality teams. If it's not baked in to the way you engage with people, then the words themselves are going to do you more harm than good. Because if I come to visit your community, or I'm planning to be a member, but over a 3-month or 6-month period, I see actions and I see demonstrations of behavior that are opposite to how I understand open and affirming, then it makes it more difficult. So your representation, 3 places: 1 in your current leadership, and your board, your staff, your team leaders, your ministry team leaders, your community partners that you're working with. There either needs to be clear and intentional representation of people who self-identify as LGBTQ+, or you need to be having conversations with people, bringing them in to advise and counsel and mentor your current leadership. Second group is representation and visibility. So your speakers, your musicians, the people who are teaching classes, and promote all of your marketing. If I just saw what was visible over a 3-month period what I believe, without you lecturing me, that this is a place where people who identify as LGBTQ plus are engaged, are involved, are seen and valued. And then the third group is representation in the planning for Pride Month, whatever activities you are doing. I'm smiling, but I wasn't smiling a few years ago when I received an email from someone who was like, Tracy, would you be willing to facilitate or moderate a conversation between 3 of us and our minister? And I'm like, tell me more. And it was because the minister had planned and announced 4 activities for Pride Month, one every week, and the theme for each week. And there were 2 of the 4 weeks that actually were pretty troublesome. And it was, the minister had a good intention, but the minister was not involved in a way that helped that minister understand that if by presenting some things a certain way, it could be very offensive to people in the LGBTQ plus community. And so we did have a great conversation, and there were some adaptations made. But even if you and you're planning, even if you are a member of one group in the LGBTQ plus community, that doesn't mean you know about the sensitivities of all the groups, unless you have done a lot of work, had a lot of conversations, and are keeping up with that. So proximity, because you know someone, one individual or a few, proximity to the community, because you're a part of one aspect of the community, doesn't mean that you don't need those 2 negatives. Ugh. That does not excuse you from reaching out and involving people in the planning for Pride Month. It's 35 minutes after the hour, which means it's time for me to close today's programming, today's ideas. And I'm happy to do that because, as I said earlier, this is one in a series. So for the next 3, maybe 4 weeks, we will be diving into what are some things to keep in mind as you are planning for Pride Month. Next week, we're going to talk about the spiritual lesson and the core spiritual principles and how you might want to integrate them in. And I will also be offering you a resource that has a template for certain programs that you can either adapt, use as they are presented, or adapt for your community. That's all the time we have for this week's episode of the Inclusive Church. My name is Tracy Brown. I really am so glad that you have hung out with me today, and I'll see you again next week, Tuesday, noon Mountain Time, right here on the New Thought Media Network.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.
Come expand your spiritual journey. Join us for Just the Talk, Sundays, 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Experience Unity Kitchener and Ottawa. Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Unity of Garden Park, New Thought Philadelphia, the Sunshine Cathedral, Unity of Savannah, and the Ohm Center for Spiritual Living. Come unleash your spiritual potential with New Thought Media Network.